In my card shuffling animation, I alluded to the fact that I'd made a little geometry nodes group that helped me populate a deck of cards. Essentially, the two problems I ran into were that I needed two separate shape keys on the bottom of the deck and the top of the deck. And then I also wanted like a non-linear way to distribute the cards in the deck. I broke it into two parts. So the first is just non-linear parts on curve. I give you both an existing straight line, but also the ability to attach to any other curve as you'd like. And then you have per quadrant control of kind of just density. So you can have a fully rich, you can put them all as the same number, keep it something low just so we can see all the quadrants separate. And 2's very low. There we go. So it's, fairly linear. There is a small overlap here. We'll talk about that in a second. So this is a very inelegant solution, but it fits very nicely into a little little node group. So in essence, what happens is I've got this curve, be it either the provided straight line or whatever curve you want to add yourself, wherever you need this. And then I take the spline parameter and then I pass it through a float curve. And we'll talk a little more about why I have these in a minute. But this float curve basically renders from 0 to 1. And then a map range just extra confirms I'm clamping from 0 to 1. And then again, said very inelegant. This is just a bunch of less than greater thans. So that converts over here into where I have the delimiters between the first and second quadrant, the second and the third quadrant, and then the third and the fourth. So I'm literally just changing the bound between where we take a greater than versus a less than to do some tiny little Boolean math to then separate the line and then assign those points to their own personal curves and then switch those curves back to points, allowing us to control the density. Said it was inelegant. But it works, and even better. So for me doing the card animation, there are instances where the cards are bent a lot more. And so to really highlight the extent that they're bent, so to emphasize the contrast more, I decrease the density of cards so that you can see more outline and more like movement. Additionally, because of these greater than and less thans, they all also have this add or subtract depending on which one it's going to, where I have an overlap factor due to how floating point numbers work and like computers and whatnot. I find it a little better to have a little overlap than none, because none you start to really see the bands between where things are. But as long as you have a little, at worst at the very center or at the very edges, you almost have what looks like overlap. But if you don't mind or want to do some cool effects, you can push it further. Yeah, so that's that. And then back to these float curves. So while this quadrant based approach is super nice, you can also do these extremely nonlinear things. I would recommend still leaving all the quadrants pretty much exactly where you would expect, and then you can modify them at will. It's a little harder to intuit, I think, at least personally. I don't feel these in this nonlinear sense. And you can also hop in here and you can change these more, whatever it is you need. These are, I like them because of how malleable they are. But yeah, this is just how I non-linearly distribute points on a curve. What ends up happening is there is a factor being grabbed here. This is the other reason I use that map range. So I'm capturing this attribute being this 0 to 1 based on this line. And I need to pass that attribute all the way to when we start to instance our objects that are being treated as shape keys. There is one small stipulation. Both of these objects should have more or less the same geometry. Like these should just be two different instances of the same geometry at a different shape. That's why the cards works well. If I were to replace one of these with Suzanne, say, I need you to see that this is not as pretty of a demonstration. The first object is going to be the entirety of your geometry. So if your second object differs greatly in terms of vertices, this won't work. But if we're treating this like shape keys, the base geometry should be the same. So the big thing here is we get that spline parameter, that spline factor per point, and then we have to capture the attribute again as we transfer from points to instances. What I just said in terms of the first object being your entire geometry is because that is the object here, the first object that is being sent to instance on points, is realized, and is then the one that the position of those vertices are then set between either this shape or the shape key of the next. You are limited to the geometry of the first. So this is very similar to the previous video, if you saw, about flattening in camera space, where we are taking a grabbed position and then we're mixing the position. So I'm literally mixing a sampled position from our first and then a sampled position from our second shape key. However, you want to be sure to use the same indices from one geometry. And then using that factor from before, a factor along the line. So this line could be the straight line. It could be the curve here. It'll treat one side. That's not what I meant. I meant to show this. So it'll also take the factor from a nonlinear curve. So no matter where these points are, they are using that. And we can go pretty dense or super sparse. So I've played with this for a little bit just to really illustrate just how much you can push these shape keys and have them just blend between them. The last couple notes to highlight, as I was just mentioning about along the spline factor, even as we overlap the points, because the instancing is done after the points are distributed, the shapes will still blend as expected. You're really just playing with where you want points, which I think is sweet. And then the final thing is, if you are using the built-in line, I tried to give you a little bit of freedom in terms of modifying the built-in line. And whatever happens, this direction is auto-normalized, so you're really just, you can do whatever you want. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you try the tool out. If you do, let me know. Excited to see what all can happen. Thanks for watching. Happy blending. See you later.